This lesson is called Sailing Off the Map as we look at the European explorers and their quest to make it to Asia to avoid the Muslims and having to pay them tax or tribute to get the nice Asian goods. Now let's take a look at this map. This, as the European Christians were beginning to explore, was the best map that was available at the time. As you can see, Europe looks halfway decent. Northern Europe, still a little rough, but as you get into Africa and over to Asia, it really just falls apart and is nowhere near accurate. But this was the latest, greatest map that was available to the explorers. Now, one of the big myths that is around the explorers is that the idea that the world was flat, and a lot of people believe the world is flat. Actually, very few people believe the world is flat. The bigger issue was the question of size. How big was the world, and where were all the different land masses at? So, as we keep this map in mind as we move forward in this talk about exploration. So we'll start off with the Portuguese and Prince Henry. So this is the destination, India. They're looking for a path to India and to get a direct route to Indian goods, and to be able to then connect with the other Asian cultures that had the refined, nice, polished goods that the Europeans were wanting, but the Muslims were standing in the way of. Now, in 1482, the Portuguese discovered the Congo River and the Congo Kingdom. At this point, they are well below what they viewed as being the edge of the map, and so they were out into the great unknown. And as they wrapped around the bend, they thought, excellent, we are almost there. We are almost to the point where we can get to India, and it'll be fast, quick way, and we'll really teach those Muslims a lesson. Now, it's important to note that in 1485, Portugal denies Cristoforo Columbus's request to sail west. Portugal had dedicated itself that they were going to find a route south and east. Their ships were able to navigate these waters, they were familiar with it, and besides, they had just rounded the bend. They felt they were near their destination. Why risk going west and not knowing really what was west when they knew that they had something going traveling south and east? Then in 1488, Bartholomew Diaz from Portugal sails around the Cape of Good Hope. Now, the Cape of Good Hope was not what he had named it. He had named it the Cape of Storms, but the Pope came along and said, look, Cape of Storms is not going to be a good marketing tool. Even though it was really stormy, even though he lost most of his ships, and that was the reason he turned back instead of going forward. Said the Pope said, we are going to call it the Cape of Good Hope because we now have good hope that we are going to make it around to India. Now we have truly found the other side of Africa in the route into the Indian Ocean. And again in 1488, Portugal denies Cristoforo Columbus's request to sail west. So look, now we really know that we have found the other side of Africa. So why throw our money into something we don't know when we already know that we will eventually be able to get there? So Bartholomew Diaz becomes the first European to sail into the Indian Ocean. Now Spain. Spain had spent the 1400s fighting off the Muslims in the Reconquista. Portugal had gotten a head start because the Portuguese had liberated themselves first, but Spain in 1492 finally defeated all of the Muslims that were on the what's known as the Iberian Peninsula, or what we call Spain, and the various kingdoms there under William and Mary unite and kick off the Spanish. Now, they had a problem. The Pope had given all of Africa to Portugal. They had set all of the land below basically what we now consider Morocco as belonging to the Portuguese. Now, as we've already learned, you don't question the Pope. The Pope controls your afterlife. So if the Pope has given all the land of Africa to Portugal, there's really not much you can go against, at least not if you're willing to risk your afterlife. So in 1492, Cristoforo Columbus, the Italian explorer, goes to the Spanish king and queen and says, look, I believe we can sail west. The Portuguese can sail south all they want, but I believe that if we sail west, we will find a short route to China and to India. See, he believed that the world was round, as many did. I know there were skeptics, but for the most part, others were in agreement that the world was round, and that India would be about 2,700 miles to the west. So Spain, desperate to get into the exploration game, funds his ships and lets him sail off. So in his discoveries, he accidentally discovers what he refers to as the West Indies Islands, or what we now consider the Caribbean Ocean. He arrives and they find land, and he turns around and he sails back. Initially, Cristoforo was disappointed because what he was looking for was gold. He was looking for something to be able to take back to Spain and say, look, I have found India, I have found riches, I have found spices, I have found all these great things. Your time was well worth it. Now, he was able to go back and say he was a success, and the book that he wrote of his exploration, thanks to the Gutenberg printing press, quickly spread all throughout Europe. But alas, the natives did not have gold. However, he did take 2 more trips, and between those different islands, he found things that proved to be quite profitable. So in 1494, there came the Treaty of Tordesillas. The Pope divided the New World between Spain and Portugal at the line of 46 degrees and 47 minutes west. The western side of this belonged to Spain. The eastern side of this belonged to Portugal. So this appeased both of these Catholic powers that were going exploring. This allowed Portugal to have Africa, and this allowed the Spanish to have the East. And the way that they came up with this line is they looked at the West Indies, where Columbus had landed. They looked at the outermost islands of Africa, and they found a point that was halfway in between. So this is where they came up with this line. Once again, all of Europe at this point was Roman Catholic. So the rest of the Europeans were going, oh shoot, we can't get into this game. Because if we do, we're defying the Pope, and then we're putting our afterlife at stake. This was a major windfall for both Spain and Portugal. So exploration continues. Now in 1497, England tries to reach India from the north, something called the Northwest Passage. So okay, well, Christopher Columbus found land going west that he thought was India, which is why the natives were called Indians. The English said, let's sail north, but they ran into a few problems. The first of which was land that we now consider to be Canada. The second problem that they faced was that water, when you get too far north, freezes, so they were not able to find a passage or the Northwest Passage to make their way around. Then in 1498, Vasco da Gama of Portugal reaches India and becomes the first of the Europeans to do so. The Portuguese then set up a base there, a trading post, to be able to start to buy and sell Indian goods and increase that trade. In the 1500s, Cabral and Diaz discover Brazil. So they were on their side of the Treaty of Tordesillas, and it allowed them to then begin to realize that there was a southern landmass, not just the northern mass. They were beginning to realize they were not in India, especially after Vasco da Gama had been to India. This trip made them realize, we stopped in this land and then we went to India that we know is India. This new land is a new world. This is not India. So here is the progression of the map. You have Europe in the center. You have a much more accurate view of Africa in the middle. And then you see Asia becomes even more of a hot mess. It's like, wait, no, but that's there, but there's other things, and I don't know. But on the western side of the map, you see the Treaty of Tordesillas is the blue line that's the kind of bluish line that's about a quarter of the way on the left, and you see the New World showing there the islands Cristoforo found, the Brazil that Diaz and Cabral found. So the map is very rapidly changing. In 1516, Rafael Perestrello of Portugal arrives in southern China. So this is another big windfall for the Portuguese, as they were then able to set up a trading post near China in some of the islands that were by there, as China, remember, had closed itself off and was only trading through one port over by what we now consider to be Beijing. So they kind of camp out on an island that is by Beijing, and Raphael, who, by the way, is the cousin of Cristoforo Columbus, proves that going this route you can reach both India and China and be able to get those goods. So Portugal begins to colonize the Pacific Islands, and they begin to take over these islands, to settle there, to set up cities there, to be able to start to take part of and eventually gain control of the various spice trades that had taken place. Now, colonize means to settle or take over land. So this is the beginning of the Europeans colonizing, of taking over land in the name of setting up spice trades. So, in 1513 to 1519, Spain and Portugal begin to explore South America, because they realize, this new land, this isn't India, this isn't China, this is someplace else. This is a new world. Let's go see what is there. Mainly, they were searching for gold and rich kingdoms and something called the South Sea. Basically, they still wanted to get to India and China by sailing west, and there was rumors that there was another sea, a larger sea, that would take them in that direction. In 1519, Ferdinand Magellan of Spain officially had a voyage that sailed around the world. So in the process, he finds the tip of South America. He sails far enough south, and that tip, right around the tip, becomes known as the Strait of Magellan. The tiny water that goes around, he found it, he gets it named after him. And then as he makes his way around, the waters went from really rough and choppy to being calm and very easy to sail, which is where the name for the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the peaceful ocean, got its name. So, on his voyage, they then continued over to Asia and they discovered the Philippines and the islands that were over there. The problem for Ferdinand Magellan is his ships made it back, but Ferdinand Magellan didn't. He caused some rioting in the Philippines, got himself killed and some of his crewmates killed, but one of his ships with about a dozen people made it back to Spain. And Ferdinand Magellan, even though his body didn't make it all the way back, his crew did, and history remembers him as setting forth on the first voyage to completely sail around the world. So 1529, the Treaty of Zaragoza. So now it was official. The world was round. They had discovered the entire circumference. But there was a problem. The Treaty of Tordesillas just focused on the western side. So now the question was, so if Spain got the west part of the Treaty of Tordesillas and Portugal got the east part, where does that other dividing line take place? So the Treaty of Zaragoza is what divides Asia between Spain and Portugal. So the Treaty of Tordesillas divides the New World. It divided up who gets which part of North America and South America. The Treaty of Zaragoza decides who got which part of Asia and Africa. So the Spanish made out good in getting the lion's share of the New World. The Portuguese received what it was they were wanting in pretty much getting the Pope's blessing on the parts of Africa and Asia that they were beginning to develop into the spice trade.